is exemplified right here. So let's start the conversation this way. What's the origin story? How did Extra Points get started? How did you go from being a fairly traditional writer about things to deciding this niche was what you were going to own?
Well, my story, I think, is similar to some of the other folks that we've had talking here. Extra Point started because I got laid off. Like many other reporters, I used to work for Vox Media, and now I don't anymore. Vox used to run a large collection of websites under the SB Nation banner. You guys might not remember that. It was a good website, doesn't really exist anymore. And Vox had, for a while, wanted to get out of the sports business. And so the pandemic was an excellent catalyst for them to finally say, oh, well, there's no sports, and we don't need to have any sports writers, so hit the bricks. And when you get laid off during the pandemic, there's no real backup plan, right? Because if you're like a reporter and you get laid off, you're like, well, maybe I could get another reporting job, and if those don't exist anymore, I could go into PR, or I could do copywriting, or I could do something else. Well, when there's a global pandemic, there's literally none of those things. So I hear from some people or read other people that, you know, and some of these kind of panels are like, I wanted to start a business because I wanted to throw off the shackles of this editorial structure that didn't love and support me, and my star can't be, you know, kept down by my outlet. And look, if that's you, awesome, God bless. I started my own business because I didn't want to work at the deli counter, and that was the only other place that was hiring in Chicago at the time, and I've been blessed that it's worked out. And as for why writing about what I do, part of this is very practical. Like you're right, covered college football relatively traditionally for almost a decade before I suddenly was into business for myself. That's a really competitive beat. I graduated from Ohio State. I know, boo. And there's 45 people on that beat. And so it's very difficult for me to think up of something that's so original, so funny, so insightful that 44 other people on that same beat didn't come up with, even if a lot of them are dumb. Like there's just not that much happening on Ohio State to justify 45 people. So that's a really hard place to compete. And if I'm going to try to compete nationally, I mean, I think I'm pretty self-aware about what I'm good at and what I'm not. Like I'm not as connected as Nicole Auerbach. If my only way of winning is to beat Ross Dellinger to being Ross Dellinger, I'm not going to win very often. So I want to go, you know, the thought is, where can I go to own a specific subset of this beat where I'm more likely to be successful, rather than trying to play the same game as other people who have bigger outlets, more experience, more money than somebody like me. The joke, there wasn't really a joke. When I started Extra Points, is I wasn't even the most famous Matt Brown writing about college football. I've got my evil doppelgangers in town as the editor for The Athletic. Totally ruins my SEO, right? So I knew I wanted to do something that was a little bit different. And I came into journalism through a different path. I don't have a journalism degree. I have a degree in political science. I also thought I was going to be an attorney until I interned for law firms, worked for the Ohio Attorney General, watched the Ohio Attorney General resign in disgrace 3 weeks after I was hired, realized maybe I don't want this guy's name on my resume. And then I realized that document review sucks. And I graduated college like 4 recessions ago. Didn't seem like a great time to borrow 120 grand. But my first job was teaching elementary school. I don't know if any of you are considering Teach for America. That was the program that I did. I spent time teaching 4th grade. I worked as a political field organizer for a little while, and I've always been around education policy and things connected to that world. So I knew a little bit more about that than your average sports writer, which comes in handy a lot when you're writing about college football, because most of college football programs are connected to public universities, which means they're subject to things like open records requests and are shared governance through state houses and through elected regents. There were issues that I had some experience with that a lot of my peers didn't. And I think that part of the trick to continuing to have a job in this world and paying your mortgage is to do something different from everybody else. And I realized that I was really interested in a lot of these things. So that's a long way of saying that's why I do what I do now.
So the business of college sports. Who reads your newsletter? I threw this out to some of my students last week in a scenario exercise, and some of them came back and said, well, maybe it's super fans of programs like Ohio State or Penn State. And that's plausible.
Sure.
How do you think about your audiences? And I very intentionally made that a plural.
Which is good, because there's really 3 groups of people that read and sometimes even pay for extra points. And it wasn't necessarily the same 3 groups of people that I thought I'd be reaching when I started. So one of those groups, which represents roughly half of my readership, according to our surveys and according to some enrichment data that we pay for, I pay for a service that matches my subscribers' email addresses with LinkedIn profiles, so I can get an idea for what they actually do for a living and can sort them into some of these buckets.
297 students, pay attention to that. It will be on the midterm.
Yeah, not surprisingly not very expensive. So half of them are what I would say with deep love and appreciation in my heart are gigantic nerds. And by gigantic nerds, I specifically mean people who do not work in college athletics, do not work in higher education, but love college football and college sports so much that if I say, hey, I wrote this story about how Ball State sells tickets, they're going to click on it. Is that audience something you could scale very easily? No. But God bless them, I'm so glad that they're here. And that is an audience of people that are like, I never really thought about what a reapplication essay looks like to move to FBS. I don't know anything about Sacramento State, but I'll click on it. So that audience is great. Not your typical first take viewer or like barstool commenter. Less likely to be my guy. Then I have a second group, which are students, both undergraduates and graduate students throughout the country, most of whom studying sports management, but some studying sports business, sports communication, sports media. Many of these students use Extra Points as a classroom curriculum supplement. There's a couple of schools across the country that actually use this as a textbook, which is deeply funny to me because some of those are places where I never would have gotten in as an undergraduate, and there's nothing that's more emotionally fulfilling that's like, who's smart now, Northwestern? Like, you're paying me. So I think there's like 22 of those schools right now. And the thinking is if you're studying college sports right now, there's no textbook you can really get because it's going to be outdated in 3 weeks. So you can either spend $80 to read something that's boring and outdated, or you could pay me $4.50 a month, and it will be less boring and written in a more conversational way that might be more accessible to a 20-year-old. So I have those people, folks that will hopefully someday be working in college sports. And then the last group are college sports industry professionals. That includes athletic directors and the various associate or senior athletic directors that run departments. It includes conference commissioners. We have, I think, every single conference commissioner in Division I reads Extra Points, and most of the ones in Division II and Division III. And then it includes people that work in industries that support college sports. So your Nikes and Adidases, your Under Armours, your ESPNs and Fox Sports, people that work for various NIL, software agencies, sports marketing agencies, law firms, even a couple of members of Congress now that they're contemplating getting involved in college sports. So anybody that needs to know this stuff for work and can also write off my subscription as a professional development expense will pay to read Extra Points. And my thinking is when I write any particular story, I can't possibly reach all 3 of those groups. My hope is that over the course of a week, I'm hitting 2 of them on a regular basis to keep them engaged, because you guys aren't going to read every single newsletter you get. I don't read every single newsletter I get. That's a lot of emails. So the hope is, like, if you subscribe and you're going to get 20 over the course of a month, you read 14 or 15 of them, and that they'll be relevant and engaging to why you chose to subscribe to my publication.
Now, you mentioned this earlier. Those 3 core groups are not necessarily the ones you thought you were going to have when you launched.
Yeah.
How did your focus on those, your definition of those different audience segments change? How did you realize, that group actually isn't reading me, but that one is?
Yeah, it's funny because I started most of my professional reporting career was at SB Nation. I had worked for traditional newspapers before. If I try really hard, I can remember how to do AP style and format and everything. But a lot of what I did at SB Nation was writing in this more informal language for weirdo fans. So and that was kind of who my fan base was when I started, to the extent that I had one. I had written a book that was about what-if questions in college football history, and the kind of person who's going to buy a book that talks about like the airplane conference of 1954, it's a Reddit weirdo. Great. Like, those are my people, and that's why I figured I would be writing for a lot. The kind of people that have message board subscriptions and follow mid-major programs and are super huge nerds. And one of the things that I learned from doing this is that those people don't pay for stuff. It might be emotionally engaging to look on Reddit and like, someone shared my story, and it looks like there's 6,000 comments in this thread. And it looks like 5,000 of them are them bitching about a paywall. Like, well, that's unfortunate. I can't make any money that way. And it wasn't until I started getting seeing subscriber emails coming in from .edus or college conferences that were low majors that I hadn't even thought about were coming to me. And I would later find out that, somebody who's like runs the Horizon League or who works at, Cleveland State or Robert Morris, they're reaching out because I'm the only guy that's ever calling the athletic director of Robert Morris about anything. And they need to know what's going on in this world or how to localize stories to make their business work. And the dirty little secret about college sports is that there's a lot more schools like Robert Morris than there are Penn State. There's a lot more fans of Penn State. The fans of Robert Morris are all blood related to somebody who plays at Robert Morris. But there's 250 of those schools, and they all have professional development budgets. And they're more likely to pick up the phone when I call. Like I've been doing this for a while. I could call Pat Kraft, especially not now. Now he's not taking anybody's calls.
You thought you were going to be able to get him when you agreed to
we were going to
campus.
meet and talk about hockey, and then of course
Something happened.
His schedule changed. But it's a lot easier for me to get a hold of everybody else, and so that became easier for me to kind of build my business around that way, where there's less competition, but still an interest and a need to support the kind of work that I want to do.
So it's interesting you say that, because our other guest, Peter, his new project is called Up Next. It is essentially vertical video hyper-targeting young viewers who are professionally engaged in Washington, policymakers, 28-year-olds who are junior staffers on Capitol Hill, or richer 28-year-olds fresh out of law school who are working at some K Street strategic communications or lobbying shop. And he realized those people aren't reading the Washington Post, but they still need to know what everybody's talking about. Let's do TikTok-style videos to reach them. Oh, and their bosses will pay me this coming out of those professional development budgets.
Yep.
So it's interesting that turned into one of your key revenue sources. That's the one Peter's certainly banking on in D.C. That's not the only revenue source you have, though. And think of the pie. How big is subscription revenue versus every other form of revenue?
So this is a good point, and I know it's not like the most exciting thing to talk about with college students, but if you are ever thinking about maybe going solo, whether you want to go solo right out of college or you think this might be something you do later in your career, you really do have to spend a lot of time thinking about, how do I translate attention or subscribers or clicks or anything else into money? Because I can't pay my mortgage with clicks or likes. I can only pay my mortgage with money. And I think it's really, really important that you find multiple ways to get money, because you can't, there's so much of making a living writing on the internet is beyond our control. Right? For a long time, the biggest source of readers and fans and engagement I would ever get is Twitter. Well, then Elon buys Twitter, he clicks the big button that says throttle all links and smashes that, and now I can't reach my audience there anymore. And that was a significant part of my business. Tomorrow, Google could decide newsletters go into promotions now, and then I'm kind of screwed unless I can get paid multiple ways. So we earn money at Extra Points in three different ways, which I think are different from most other newsletters. The single biggest one right now is still reader subscriptions. And actually, by sheer volume, the single biggest would be fans who do not work in college sports paying me $9 a month. And then slightly below that are industry professionals who pay $9 or an annual subscription. And I don't have the numbers exactly in front of me, but I think for this fiscal year, that's going to be a little over 60% of our total revenue. The second place we get, and that includes revenue from selling for curriculum support and selling bulk packages to schools. The second bucket is through advertising, through sponsorships, through ads within the newsletter. And I'll be honest, this is a place where I am still not very good. This is where a lot of the internet still makes its money. If you're reading any website that's free, they're making it primarily through ads. It's a tough business because I write about nerd stuff. And the thing about nerd stuff is that you don't get 400,000 people reading about Sacramento State's budget or about college wrestling or about anything that happens in Division II. You might get 40,000 people, and they might all be willing to pay for it, but it's harder to sell energy drinks that way. So the more of the ads that we run are either programmatic through like a third party that we kind of brokers through some of that for us, or for B2B sales. People who want to sell stuff to your athletic department. We will run ads through AstroTurf companies, which is not like me making a political joke. I mean, like literally the people that install AstroTurf will run ads with us, or like NIL software companies. So that's a second bucket. I'd love to make more money from that. I have not yet figured out how to do it efficiently. If you do, my card's over there. I got a job for you. And then the third place is new, which is through software. In the college sports world, almost every public school, ironically not Penn State, but almost every other public school is subject to open records requests, which means that anybody here or any other reporter or any Joe Q public can send out a form, send out an email, and make them send you their budget. You can get the coaches' contracts, the athletic directors' contracts, a lot of their key vendors. So I can look at everybody else's Adidas shoe deal. And I was doing a lot of this reporting. We decided to build a database. We spent $10,000 from some outside developers, and I did a little bit of coding myself. And then we sell access to this to newsrooms, to agencies, to some academic departments, and then a lot of athletic departments. Because if they need to hire a volleyball coach, it's cheaper for them to pay me to look at all the volleyball coach salaries and figure out what's the median salary or what's the buyout for this person that I might want to hire, or if I need to get a new shoe deal. What are my peers getting? Let's go look through that. And we sell that for $2,000 a year or $200 a month, and that is about 30-ish% of where we are at the moment.
Bloomberg gets $2,000 a month for their terminals. Have you thought about jacking up that $2,000 per year?
It's funny you mention that because there is another company in our space that does do this. And if you're on the college sports beat, you might have heard of it. It's called WinAD, and they charge $17,000 a year. And our thought was, well, you don't have to be Encyclopedia Brown to get a lot of the same stuff. We'll just try to beat them on price and beat them on the fact that they don't have a great personal reputation in the industry, and a lot of people in the industry trust us. And that's been helpful, but college sports is different, and I think other reporters will find this in the B2B world. Inertia is this super powerful force, and people don't always buy stuff because it's the best thing. They bought it because their buddy's buying it. They bought it because that company bought them drinks at NACTA, because they bought it because they've been doing it for 25 years. And so prying people away from that is very difficult. I can't see a world where we ever sell it for a lot more money than this, because we want this to also be accessible to people like you, or to newsrooms, or to folks besides the Penn State Athletic Department.
Was there a moment in the last 5 years where you went from, well, I'm going to try this because this is the best thing I can do to pay my mortgage, to your earlier point, where you realized, hey, this is working?
About a month into launching Extra Points, so this would have been like late May of 2020. I was getting enough paid subscription revenue where I could no longer file for Illinois unemployment, which is not how this stuff typically goes. Yes. And at that point, I'm like, well, I guess this is my job now. And like I think in those first 6 months, I still applied to the Athletic. We've talked to other companies about buying me out, and look, there's a world where if somebody wants to give me a big enough novelty-sized check and pay for health insurance, I'd gladly sell this thing. Because to me, like being a self-employed or an entrepreneur is not like some North Star that I have to do. But really, it was really pretty quickly when I realized, okay, this is making me more money now than freelancing or doing anything else. And it was about a year and a half is when I made more money than I ever made at Vox. And I'm like, all right, well, this is the job. And I wish I could tell you that I wake up every day always convinced about that. It's weird because like I intellectually know that in the independent media world, Extra Points is a success. And I can look at the spreadsheet and know like, hey, yeah, I'm making more money than I did working for Jim Pankoff. This is pretty great. I get to, make jokes on Twitter, and that's still my job. But I still wake up a lot of the time thinking, is this the day everyone figures out I'm a fraud? Is this the day where it all comes crumbling down and I have to go back because I snuck into this world? And that's true for a lot of the reporters that I know and writers that I know. I'm very fortunate, but I still feel like I have to prove myself every day because, to the earlier point, I don't have one boss now. I have about 3,000 bosses of people who pay me, and I want to make sure that I'm delivering something that's worth it to them.
It's interesting that moment of realization came early, because one of the things I was going to ask Peter about. Yeah. Peter's project has been live for less than 6 weeks, but Peter has been working on his project for 15 months before that. lots of conversations, customer discovery, it's called in the entrepreneurship world, with leaders of K Street firms, with all those Capitol Hill staffers I was talking about. Yeah. He was gratified last night when his sponsor said, hey, let's do more of this tomorrow, but he was not surprised because he knew from all that work, this is going to be a success. It's kind of interesting to me that in a hurry, you found out it was going to be a success and you did not have that benefit of 12 to 15 months of thinking and planning.
No, I haven't told this story that often, but this is true. The 2 days after I got laid off, April of 2020, I'm sitting on my couch trying to figure out what to do. I'm talking with my wife, and my in-laws were living with us at the time. They were working in Japan, and they got sent back to the United States, but they had rented out their house. They had nowhere else to live. So I didn't get the privilege of having these kind of conversations in privacy. And I was explaining to my wife, and who was extremely supportive and still is throughout all of this, I think I'm going to go independent. And then my mother-in-law looks at me and she's like, who the hell would pay $7 to read you? And she didn't mean that exactly as a way. I mean, and the funny thing is, she didn't mean that. My mother-in-law loves me, and wasn't trying to be mean.
Are you sure?
Legitimate, yeah, I know, right? But she's not a sports person or a higher education person, and because I don't exist on cable television, I wasn't famous, and the idea of anybody paying for this to be famous, it didn't compute to her. It really wasn't until my third year of doing this, and I had been on ESPN, I had been on the Paul Feinbaum show, I had a story written about me in the Washington Post. It wasn't until I did local television in Provo, Utah, and one of her siblings called her and it's Lori, I saw Matt on TV today, and she's like, oh my God, I guess he is a big deal. And I say that just because a lot of, because I'm not from the media extended universe, I guess. I didn't have other people that were repeatedly telling me that this was going to work. And I think you get a level of almost PTSD if you're a reporter long enough, because you just get laid off so many times, or see things that you stress tested and focus grouped just bomb. And it's kind of a frustration to my business partners who didn't come from this world. Why are you so negative? I'm because I've been doing this for a while, man. This stuff doesn't always work. I probably should be more optimistic, but it always does feel like a surprise. You look at the chart beat and go, I guess it is working.
Well, but it sounds like your mother-in-law didn't know something you knew, which is the sheer size and scale of the business of college sports. Give these guys a sense, how much money is at stake in some of these?
It's literally billions, and it's billions in a way that you might not necessarily think. So let's talk about Penn State specifically. Not exactly a state secret that this town doesn't exist really without this gigantic university. You have an athletic department budget that, off the top of my head, is going to be bringing in close to, if not excess of $200 million a year in just earned revenue for Penn State athletics. The majority of that money is going to come from the broadcast contract from CBS, Fox, and NBC, primarily for Penn State football games, but also wrestling and basketball and everything else. But also the tickets and parking spaces and beer and everything else for your two gigantic stadiums. And then licensing. Every We Are Penn State sweater and hoodie and sock sold everywhere in the world gives a little bit of a kickback to this athletic department. There's about 30 or so schools that make a gajillion dollars that way. But what is way more common for the Robert Morrises of the world and the 200 or so Division II institutions and the 360 or so Division III institutions in this country, to say nothing of the NAIA, Christian colleges, and JUCOs, is they look at their athletic department as critical revenue for maintaining enrollment. Many of you probably know somebody from your high school or from your hometown that is playing at one of the smaller Penn States or at Kutztown or one of the other Division II schools because they're swimming or they're playing baseball or they're playing softball. I see people nodding, right? They're probably not on full scholarship. They're probably on a partial or half scholarship. And a lot of those people are at California University or whatever just to play sports. And the school says, I don't care if anybody ever buys a ticket at this place. That tuition is what keeps us open. And that's why they have athletic programs. That's why there's still hundreds and hundreds of college football teams that nobody ever watches, because they recognize that if people show up there, then they have tuition. And if you have a football team, then you have a marching band, and then you have a sports information department, and you have somebody that's streaming the game, and you have this gigantic supporting ecosystem just for that. To say nothing of all the people that are selling shoes and AstroTurf and compliance software and streaming equipment and recruiting message boards, all of this stuff. Then it becomes billions with a B. And it can be a little bit overwhelming because that really what I just described, that's like 6 different newsletters, right? I try to get as best as I can to talk about where that money goes, why people are earning it, where it's being spent, not just for football, but across this entire ecosystem. Really, I mean, the kind of fun thing about it is everything's a college sports story on some level. Whatever you want to write about, we can find a higher education or a college sports angle to it.
Yes, people do go to those smaller colleges precisely for that reason. My middle son went to a particular school over arguably better choices because he could play D3 tennis there.
Sure.
And he still kicks my butt.
Yeah.
But flipping that around,
Yeah.
I know some of you guys, especially those of you from out of state, came here in part because of Penn State athletics, right?
Sure.
The football and in particular, the football culture around this place. I want to give you guys a chance to ask some questions of Matt, so let's open it up. Don't be shy, and since I see a whole bunch of my students here, the usual threat applies. If you don't ask, I'm going to cold call you.
Yeah. Real quick, I do not know who Penn State's going to hire as our next coach. If I knew, I wouldn't tell you. I'd have published it and charged you $9 first. But then I would have written it myself. I don't know. But anything else, more than happy to talk about.
Bring him. Come on.
It's not a deep question, but what's that service called that links your customers' email addresses to
It is called Mega Hit. Yep. You bet.
Good one.
Some strategies. You know, one thing I'd love to do more are events. We didn't really get a chance to talk about this. We have one event a year. We have our own bowl game. We tried to do a Division I bowl game, made some calls to ESPN events. If you want to sponsor the cheapest bowl game in FBS, the New Mexico Bowl, it will cost you $400,000, which is too rich for my blood.
You said you called ESPN events. Most people don't realize this. There are, last time I looked, 40-some bowl games outside of the very top tier. Who owns most and manages?
ESPN owns almost all of them. There's like 6 that are independently operated. So couldn't afford the New Mexico Bowl, but you can get a Division III bowl game for $5,000. So that's what we did. So we have the Extra Points Bowl. It's in Canton, Ohio. They played at the NFL Hall of Fame Stadium. Pennsylvania team actually won the Extra Points Bowl last year. Westminster beat Marietta. We'll be there again this year. We don't make money from that. The ticket sales from the Extra Points Bowl goes to support those Division III schools. We use that event primarily as a marketing tool to reach Division III college administrators, and because it's fun. You get to wear the bowl jacket and flip the coin, and it's my kids can play in the luxury box. It's great. I'd love to do more events to better reach both the college student and the administrator world. The thing that I've learned though is I don't want to do something unless I feel like I can do it well. And running an event, I think, takes a different skill set than making a tweet, filing a FOIA, or writing a story. So in a perfect world, I'd love to partner with either a university or an organization like the Chronicle of Higher Education to do one of those. That might be something we end up doing next year. We've also been able to better reach students through our computer game. And I would love to turn that into something maybe next year that's sophisticated enough for us to sell it on Steam or play it on your Switch or something. And we have we're on the path to being able to do that, and we want to be relevant where people are. Increasingly, the places where we're strongest, those social media networks, that's great if you want to reach other, washed late 30s dads. But if I want to be relevant with folks your age or a little bit older, I need to be other places, and maybe that needs to be computer games.
And describe what that game is, because when I looked at it, the first thought that I had was my oldest son, who is a massive fan of the English Premier League, plays a year-after-year game called Football Manager, where you basically play general manager of an English Premier League team.
Yeah.
What's Athletic Director 4000?
It's funny, yeah. Football Manager's been going on since before I was born. That was an Apple IIe 5.5-inch floppy game and that is kind of aspirationally what I'd like this to be. What Athletic Director Simulator 4000 is, it's slightly overdramatic as a joke, is it asks players to take over a low major Division I program. We don't use exact names because I could not afford licensing. And also some of the questions the licensing board said we have to remove, and we weren't willing to do that. But you start out as an AD of a school like a Horizon League or like a SoCon school.
We'll call it Dold Ominion or something like that.
Something like that. Yeah, BAM Houston State.
Sure.
And you have to handle a bunch of scenarios that are very realistic to what an actual administrator would face. Like, you'll get a scenario, you get multiple choice questions on how you want to respond to that, and then the game makes a weighted dice roll depending on how you responded and how that impacts your budget and your political approval rating and your Director's Cup ranking. And then if you do well, you get promoted. If you do poorly, you get fired. And some of the questions we exaggerated for comedic effect, but like, they're based on real things. We'd call up ADs and be like, tell us about the time you had to fire your bowling coach because he was having an affair with one of your students. And how can we maybe tweak that question so we won't get sued, but make it, so it's a real thing that you might have to handle if you're an AD. We built it primarily for, Reddit weirdos or fans, but then we quickly realized there's an educational component to it. I would say it's aesthetically built to resemble the old school Carmen Sandiego games. And part of that was because I can't draw and that we didn't have the money for fancy 3D graphics or anything. But, you have the 8-bit audio of fight songs. You have this retro, 16-bit inspired graphics. And there's about 300 scenarios that are in the game. And we're hoping to build this more into a football manager-like world.
More questions from you guys.
Yeah.
Because a lot of these people love writing and reporting, but they don't, the business part of it. Did you do any formal training on the business side, or did you see it as a reporting project? I'm going to learn how to do this.
I didn't do formal training. My formal training was the Chicago Public Library. And I would regularly then check out books on accounting, checked out books on Python programming, checked out books on a couple of other things, and through YouTube University, which, it's how I learned how to do home repairs and woodworking and a bunch of other things, because I couldn't afford to go back to school. And I didn't have the luxury of time. Like I would have loved to have taken a year and done focus groups and studying and everything, but I got little kids, which means I never have time to myself. And I needed to get this going quickly. You're right in that I don't really love doing it. Part of it was my dad was an entrepreneur when I was a kid. He painted factories. He painted restaurants. He painted hotels. He was a really good painter. But the other stuff really kind of wore him down to the point where it impacted us as a family. And that's kind of been in the back of my mind. Like, nobody ever wants to be their old man, right, when they grow up. And I definitely don't want to be my dad. But I also like providing for my family, and my wife's been unemployed for 9 months. So I regardless of how I feel about it, I've got to do it. I would love to be in a world. Honestly, I would love to not have to write every day, and to write more second and third drafts, write a second book, write more computer games, do more investigative work. But the business realities right now require me to publish 4 days a week and to be involved, if not heavily involved, in sales and strategy and other things. And some of those are intellectually interesting. I like being paid. I like solving problems. It's fun to say this is my thing. But no, I don't wake up every day passionate about B2B sales, right? Like, this isn't LinkedIn. I can tell you guys the truth. That is not what makes me want to wake up every morning. But part of paying your bills sometimes is doing stuff you don't like to do and learning how to do it well.
Chris?
Yeah, and this is the kind of constant push and pull between my lead business partner right now, who does not come from the media world. He came from tech, and his thought is like, let's AI everything. Let's put everything you've ever written into a LLM. We'll call it MattGBT, and we'll have that answer questions from our readers, and we'll sell that. I'm like, I don't want to replace myself. That sounds like that sounds like something that Vox would have done before they fired me. I don't want to do that. Like a lot of reporters, I had experimented with using chat models for research purposes. I'm going to be honest. They all suck at that. And they, because I would think like, oh, I need to write the story about television valuation rights for Conference USA. The chat bot, give me the 4 professors of sports media at R1 research institutions who I could potentially call. This is gonna make that shut up. And I found that like I couldn't rely on this to do anything where I had any modicum of expertise, and I can write faster than it can anyway. So I completely threw that out. I used AI in helping to develop Athletic Director Simulator. One thing that I think we kind of forget a little bit about with a lot of these chatbots is they understand Python a lot better than they understand English. And I am about as good of a developer as a precocious high schooler. So there are some things for like debugging where AI is awesome. We've done used AI a little bit for data analysis of gigantic, reams and reams of financial data. If I have 300, what they call these MFRS reports, which are the itemized athletic department budgets, and they're all in the same format, you can do that math better than I can. If you treat it like a calculator, then it's great. But I guess I'm kind of a Luddite or Luddite in many ways, and I think there's a lot of breathless excitement about AI tools in reporting and running these small businesses, and I find most of them to be really insufficient if you care about the quality of your work. Like, this is the dirty little secret about newsletters in general, is that most of them are just not very good. And the way that most newsletters make money is through arbitrage of, I'm going to buy a subscriber for 45 cents, and I'm going to sell them something garbage for 70 cents, and I don't really care what's actually in the newsletter. That's the dirty little secret of how Morning Brew worked and how a lot of other really big newsletters work. And if that's how you want to make money, that is a business. I think that sucks. I don't want to do that. I view what I do more as I am an artisanal furniture maker rather than IKEA. And I mean, I'm not going to compete on scale, but if you want something that was made by a person and has typos and scratches like a person, I'm your guy.
One more question from you guys. Don't be shy. Yes.
It's a really good question, and I wish I could tell you that, like, here's this mathematical formula that I follow to make sure I never alienate my audience. If you figure that out, I'd love to pay you a lot of money for it. The kind of North Star that I have, maybe you might have a different one, this is just what's worked for me, is to be as absolutely honest with my audience as possible. And part of that means that, like, I'm very explicit that I have some biases. I am an unapologetic lover and defender of the land-grant mission. I am an absolute honk for the Moral Land Grant Act. So if that means so I care about schools like Penn State existing. I'm an immigrant's kid. Like I look at what places like Ohio State did for my family, and I believe in that mission. And that comes up sometimes in college sports, and I'll spell that out. And if you're a super cynic, or if you want to turn universities into Elon's chatbot or something, I'm not your guy. There's a couple of times when I think it's been relevant to disclose to my audience, you can all figure this out if you look me up on LinkedIn. I used to work for the DCCC. I've organized labor unions before. I'm Latino, even though my name's Matt Brown and I look like this, like I'm one of the white ones. We make those in Brazil. And like all of these things are important because we're talking about federal legislation that's controlled by Republicans sometimes, or sometimes, hey, it's a little bit hard for me to focus because I live in Northwest Chicago and they're dropping tear gas right now. And I don't do that all the time because I don't like sounding like some kind of liberal honk, but I want to tell the truth. And I am fortunate that a lot of people pay me $9 or invite me into their inbox, not because they agree with every single thing that I'm going to say, but because they trust me. And we recognize when you have a relationship built on trust, just like you do with your friends, that you're going to disagree on some things. But you respect that person enough that you're willing to persevere through those disagreements. And sometimes that I don't nail that as well as I'd like, but that's the North Star that I try to hew to.
It's interesting you use that word trust, though, since that came up even in our very first session this morning, that legacy media have largely lost that trust, but because you're a real human being and people get a sense of all of those things you just discussed, you have more trust, even when writing about controversial things like, a land-grant university is about to pay as much as $50 million to somebody to not coach for them for the next 8 years.
Yeah. But between us friends, Penn State's probably only going to have to pay like $11 million for James Franklin's going to get another job. But you're right. And if we wanted to look at not fraud, but misuse of money in this kind of institution, wouldn't be that hard to do. Or you could point and say like, hey, this is a land grant institution where maybe the curriculum is changing because of what various politicians might want, or who you're allowed to recruit, or what you're allowed to say to those recruits. That stuff. I have a lot of sympathy for people that are like, just stick to sports, man. But college sports doesn't stick to sports. Like you can't ignore it being a part of society. That shapes a lot of why this school is really good. This school is really good for a long time because this was the avatar of the warrior poets, the land-grant institution that makes leaders of men. And we're not going to do the same things that the SEC does. That's part of Penn State's like ethos and myth. And it's not even all wrong. You can't talk about that stuff and pretend that it's not politics. Part of the deal.
Excellent. Appreciate all your questions. Join me in thanking Matt.
Thanks, everybody.
Peter, who sent his regrets, says he will be back on campus another time, and I will hold him to that. We are going to take a short break. We will be back here at 3:15 for our final discussion of the day with a wrap-up address from a Penn State alum who is currently building what he calls ESPN for Generation Z. There will be lessons in that for all of you about how you can just do this yourself. Thanks very much. We will not.